it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Flamingo Together, Ahoy Matey, Swan Soiree, Toucan Do It, Critters from the Past, and You Are Sublime. And I'm going to be coloring with my Copics to match our current Lawn Fanatics color inspiration, which I'll pop on screen right here. So I have stamped those images out with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock. So I'm going to jump right in with my flamingos, and I'll be using RV11, RV13, and RV14. I'm going to start with the male flamingo, where I'm making him a male in this little couple, since the other one has some little eyelashes. And I am placing his shadows down the left side of his body since he's facing toward the right. It's going to be a central light source. So the light is in the center of the card, and then it would be reflecting on their faces, keeping them nice and light. So the shadows would fall down the backs. I'm also going to add some shadow under his wing. I'm going to blend out that RV14 with the RV13 and then fill in with the RV11. And then I'm going to move over to the female flamingo, and I'm going to color her the same way, except I'm going to reverse her shadows. So her shadows are going to fall on the right hand side of her body, placing it along the back of her head and neck and the top of her wing, and then also a shadow underneath the wing. Blending out with the mid-tone, just doing little circular motions to break up the edge of that darkest shade so I don't leave behind any harsh lines. And then I'm going to repeat that same process with my lighter shade, which is the RV11, until she's all filled in. Then I'm going to darken up this combo slightly by bringing in RV17, and I'm going to do my flower, placing that on the tips of the petals, and then blending toward the center with the RV14 as the midtone and the RV13 as the highlight. And I am coloring a few additional images off screen, but they're all repeats of the ones that you already see here. Then I'm going to lighten up this combo by taking away the RV14 and 17 and bringing in RV10. And I'm going to do my baby flamingo. And I am taking a little bit of artistic license here. Baby flamingos are typically gray, not pink. But I just wanted to have a cute little pink baby flamingo. I'll also add a little bit of that RV10 to my peacock's beaks. And then I'm going to bring in T0, T1, and T3. And I want to do a little bit of a transition from two different shades on the eggshell. And I don't even know what color a typical flamingo's eggshell would be, but I just thought that this would be pretty and it would stick within the color palette. So I used the grays on the right hand side with the RV10 on the left, and then added a few dots in there with the T3. I did not use the T3 for the rest of the egg, just the spots, but I am going to use the T3 for the darkest on my stones, blend out with the T1, and then use the T0 for the highlight. I will note that these stones do not have dies for them, so I did have to cut those out by hand. I'll keep that RV10 and add in RV00 and do my parrot. Again, I'm just playing with the color palette here. I don't know if there's a such thing as a pink parrot, but there is going to be on this card. That's the fun thing about being card makers. And I did fill in the center of the flower as well. Then I'll bring in N5 and N7, and I'm going to do the tip of the flamingo's beaks, and then the full beak of the parrot with the N7 first, and then blending out with the N5. And then I'm going to move on to my tree trunks, and I debated long and hard about what to do here because there's no brown in the color palette that we were assigned for this challenge. So I went with the most gray toned browns that there are with Copics, which is the E70s. And I actually even added in a bit of a gray with the W1. So I'm using W1 with E70 and E71 for the trunks, and just placing the shading where they are kind of like pressed together where the light wouldn't hit. And then on the right hand side of the larger palm tree, since that is going to be on the right hand side of the card, blend it out with the E70 and then the E71. And then for the coconuts, I'm going to darken up the combo by bringing in the E74, blending out with the E71, and then filling in with the E70. So it's not perfectly in line with the color palette that is on the challenge board, but it is as close to the spirit of the challenge as I can get. And I'm going to do the same thing with my greens. There's no greens in that color palette, so I'm going to go with cool toned greens that have a bit of a blue undertone, just so it ties in with that color palette the best. So I'm using G00, G02, and G03 for my palm fronds. And I'll use the same shades for the larger palm tree as well. I'm going to color the top portion of each of those fronds with the G3, with the exception of the center one, since we see both sides of that a little bit better. So the light would be hitting from both sides. So I put it just a little bit more to the right hand side. And then I'll blend that out with the G02 and use the G00 for the highlight. Then I'll take away the G03 and add in the G quadruple 0, and I'm going to do this fern style plant down below using the G02 closest to the stem, blending out with the G00, and then I'll use the G quadruple 0 on the edges of each of those leaves. Then I'll switch to a darker cool toned green, and that is G14, G16, and G17. The G14 actually has a little bit more warmth to it, but the G16 and G17 are quite cool toned. So I'm going to do my grasses with that. I'm also going to do some of my leaves, and I'm actually going to split those in half and do a two-tone. So I'll do the dark green on one side of each of the leaves, and I'm going to reverse which side for the different leaves. Like I said, I have a few extras on another sheet off screen. And then the other half of those leaves I'm going to do in a turquoise. I'm using BG11, BG13, and BG15 for that. So the turquoise is in the color palette, so we're pulling these greens into the color palette of the challenge. For the other tall leafy plant, I'm going to use BG10 and BG13, just filling in the full leaf with the BG10 and then adding a dot of the BG13 by the stem. Then I'll switch to a darker turquoise with BG34, BG45, and BG49 for these thicker, more rounded grasses or leaves. So BG49 in the shadow, BG45 for the midtone, and then BG34 for the highlight. And I did go back in with a second layer of the darkest two shades. Then I went over the eyes of my open-eyed critters with a black gel pen and trimmed these images out with their matching dyes. For my background, I'm going to be doing a bunch of different layers out of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. These first ones are using the Lawn Fawn Stitched Hillside Borders, and these are going to be my sandbars. So I am going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks, and I'm using Antique Linen and Gathered Twigs. Again, I wasn't sure what to do because this doesn't fall inside the parameters of the color challenge. But I can't really make sand gray or black. It just, I mean, I guess I could have, but it just didn't seem to fit with the card. I thought it would just get too heavy and dark. So I am going to darken that up with some Gathered Twigs. But I do think it's okay to add a few natural tones to the color palette, as long as the main images are predominantly in the color palette that was given for the challenge. I think it's still okay. So that's what I'm choosing to do for this card. So I have blended on those colors, and now I'm going to add a little bit of splatter so that it will look like sand. It'll just give it a bit of texture. So I press both of those inks onto an acrylic block. I'm going to mix it up with a little bit of water and tap it all over the background. I'm going to do the lighter color first, and then I'll go in with the darker color. And I'm trying to get as fine of droplets as I can because I really want it to have that sandy texture. And then once I'm happy with how that is looking, I'm going to set these two pieces aside to dry. And then I'm going to move on to my next grouping, and I've used the stitched simple wavy borders for these. And then I also have a leftover piece, which is going to be my sky. I'm actually going to work on that first. I'm going to bring in some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to add that all over this piece. I am letting it purposely be a little bit splotchy because I think that gives it a look of a cloudy sky. And even though I will be bringing in some clouds as well, I kind of don't mind that in the background. It helps separate it a bit from the water. So I'm just making sure that it's dark enough on the edges, and then I'll set this piece aside and move on to my front wave, which is going to be the one that has the biggest waves that are the most spread out. And I'm blending that Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink onto this piece as well. We're going to go lightest to darkest, so with the lightest being towards the viewer and then the darkest toward the horizon line. I did take my Peacock Feathers ink blending tool and added a touch of that to the top of the waves so that we would have a bit more definition. I did not ink that up. It's just whatever ink is left over on that ink blending tool. And I did that a couple of times until I was happy with that amount of definition. Then I'm going to move on to my second piece. This will have slightly less spread out waves. And this is going to have the Salvage Patina at the bottom with a lot more of the peacock feathers. So I'm going to actually ink that tool up and pull that more than halfway down that panel and then go back with the Salvage Patina to kind of soften it a bit and just make sure that it is darker than the first one. I want to go gradually as we go up. Then we'll move on to our third set of waves, which is the one that is closest together. I can put away the Salvage Patina because I'm only going to use the peacock feathers at the bottom and then Uncharted Mariner at the top. So the blue is also not in that color palette. It's more of a turquoise, so I'm only going to use a little bit at the top there, but then I'm going to blend back over that quite a bit with the peacock feathers, so we only get the blue being the definition at the top, but it still looks more turquoise than blue. Then I'm going to bring in my clouds, and these are from the Spring Showers dies. And I'm just going to add a little bit of Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink down at the bottom of each of those so that they have some definition as well. And then I can set all of these pieces aside to dry completely. And then once they have, I'm actually going to start assembling this card before I stamp my sentiment because I want to make sure that I have it placed perfectly on this card. So I'm gluing the sky to my card base. It is a Lawn Fawn Mermaid card base, and I just scored and folded that to a standard size card. I'm going to glue on the front wave to the front sandbar. These are going to go down at the bottom of the card. So I'm going to glue those together now, but I am not going to glue them to the card yet. I'm going to use them as a placeholder to figure out the rest of the layers. So the darkest wave is going to go the highest up. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere that with some liquid glue. And then next I want to have the small little island that is going to be in the distance. So I'm going to grab my second wave and use that as a placeholder while I figure out the placement of that. I want that to be over on the left-hand side of the card, so I'm just tucking it where I want it, making sure it's lined up flush with the left side of the card. And then once I'm happy with that, I can glue my second wave down over top. And again, I'm just always making sure that the left and right sides are flush with the edges of the card. Then I can pop this into my MISTI so I can stamp my sentiment, and I'm using one from the Reveal Wheel Sentiments, and it says, "Hope your day is the best ever." I'm going to ink that up with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I inked that up twice, and then the word "your" wasn't quite dark enough, so I inked up just that and pressed that down one more time. Then I'll open up this card so I can stamp on the inside, and I'm doing that in Peacock ink. And I'm taking one of the Flamingos again, and the "You Are So Fabulous" is from that same sentiment stamp set. So now that the sentiment is on there, I can go ahead and add my sandbar and front wave. And these I'm going to pop up with some foam tape. So I just peeled off the release papers. I'm lining that up with the bottom corners of the card and popping that into place. And then I am adding my clouds to the scene, figuring out how I want those to be placed. And then I decided that I wanted those popped up with some foam tape as well, so we would have the same amount of height at the top of the card as we do down at the bottom. I am going to glue the medium-sized cloud flat to the card, and then I'll have the little one popped up over top of that. So I'll go ahead and add that one first, and I want it to be hanging off the edge a little bit. And then the smaller cloud is going to be in toward that sentiment, kind of boxing it in on the left-hand side. And then the large cloud is going to box that sentiment in on the right-hand side. So it just really draws your eye to it. And then once I have those placed, I will trim off whatever is hanging over the edges with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. And then I can bring in my images. So the first thing I'm going to add is those smaller palm trees, because I thought since they are smaller, they're going to look like they're further back in the distance. So those are going on that distant sandbar. And I'm popping them up on foam tape because they're going to overlap the smaller cloud, which is already popped up on foam tape, so it kind of had to be. Although I didn't like the look of the shadow at the bottom, so I am going to change that. But first I'm going to add my taller palm tree, and I'm just figuring out the placement because I'm going to need a little bit of foam tape to support the parts that go over the waves. I'll get that situated, and then I'm going to tear off the foam that's at the bottom of the trunks of palm trees and just glue that down. So the bottom will be attached to the flat sandbar, but then the top will be popped up. Then I wanted to figure out the placement of my two adult flamingos so I can kind of envision the rest of the scene around them and start to fill that in. So I'm going to grab some different leaves and start to adhere those on the left and right and just start building in from the outside edges. And I'll be using a mix of the foam tape and the liquid glue, just depending. I want everything to be on only one level. So if it's going over places that are flat, then it will have some foam tape. And if it's going over areas that are already popped up, then it will just have the liquid glue. That will keep everything really nice for mailing. So I decided I could go ahead and add my male flamingo next, because since he's popped up, I can also tuck things back behind him very easily. And I will add my female flamingo in there as well. I want her to be overlapping that palm tree a bit because I need room for the baby flamingo in front of her. So I'm just going to continue to build out that scene, tucking things in here and there wherever they look good. I always do lay out all of my stamps ahead of time so that I know at least an idea of where I want things to go, but there's always only one stamp of each image, so I can only go so far, and then the rest I just have to kind of play by ear in the moment and figure out as I start to put things together. And sometimes what I originally envisioned changes a bit, you know, it just depends on how the card is starting to come together. So I always like to have a plan, but I always also allow for changes to happen in the moment. So I'm trying to create a little nest for that baby flamingo to sit in, and I want him to look like he's just hatched out of the egg. So I did stamp the other half of the egg as well. Although actually they're both the top of the egg, and there's a baby dinosaur in the bottom of the egg from the Critters in the Past stamp set. But I was using the other one as the top, but it just didn't fit in the scene. It would have covered up too much of that little nest, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted that little nest to show, to bring in all of the vibrant greenery and leaves. I did add my parrot up to the top of the large palm tree. And then I just continued filling this scene in. I was having so much fun decorating it and just adding all these different plant life, figuring out where I wanted these stones to go so I could have a few more pops of gray to tie in with the color palette. Although there's not gray in the color palette, I don't think. It was black, but it still is kind of like a nod to gray is, you know, just a lighter form of black. So yeah, I'm just going to continue working, and I felt like the left side needed something tall as well. So I'm just going to tuck the other tall little plant there next to the male flamingo. And I've got another leaf that I can add and another small rock, so I can bring that over to the male flamingo's side as well. And then I have 3 of those little flowers that I colored, so I'll put those all around the scene as well for some more pops of that hot pink. I'm going to put 1 over on the left side, and then I'll have 2 over on the right, just figuring out the perfect placement for that. And so I'm going to put 1 back behind the palm tree in that cluster, and then 1 close to the baby flamingo down towards the little eggshell. So I used every image that I stamped and colored except for the other half of that eggshell. So pretty good. I got everything else in there. Then of course I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle, so I put some stardust stickles in the centers of the flowers, and then I also added it to the wings of all of my birds. So not too much, and just a touch at the bottom edge of the clouds as well. So I will pick up this card and lift it up to the light so you can see all of the detail, tip it so you can see that sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside. I really had so much fun with this design. I love flamingos, and just really happy with how this one turned out. So if you enjoyed it, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I would love to read your feedback. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you'd like to be alerted whenever I post new videos. All of the products I used will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought that you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.